Peter Baxter, welcome to MSF TV. Tell me, if Australia does win its bid for the Security Council seat in the UN, what issues would you like us to champion?
I was in New York only a little over a week ago with the Prime Minister during her attendance at the UN General Assembly, and she said very clearly in her meetings at the UN at the time that Australia would focus on building on our experience in particularly peace building and peacekeeping. You might be aware, but Australia has had a very significant role in providing assistance, both from a development perspective, but also from a security perspective, to a number of fragile and conflict-affected states in our region and beyond, from Afghanistan to Timor-Leste to Solomon Islands. So we think we've got a real contribution to make through our practical experience and the contributions that we've made globally to the peace building and peacekeeping agenda. One of the manifestations of that has been our support for what's called the G7 Plus process, which is a group of fragile and conflict-affected states who have formed an association to come up with an idea called the New Deal, and really looking at how donors like Australia can work with fragile and conflict-affected states to help them not only achieve stability, but build on that stability and actually achieve some development gains. So we think that's a particular area where we'll add value.
What about in terms of natural disasters? Australia's in a region that's very susceptible to natural disasters. How does AUSAID see that we can, do you feel that we're ready for any natural disasters that could happen in our region?
Well, in answer to the second part of the question, are we ready for natural disasters in our region? It's unfortunate but true that we get a lot of practice. The Asia-Pacific region is the most disaster-prone region on Earth, as you know, and AUSAID is usually one of, if not the first responder. We have responsibility within the Australian government for coordinating our humanitarian response and our response to natural disasters. And we have very detailed and well-practiced arrangements with our partners within the Australian government and within the non-government organisations that we work with to respond within 48 hours to any request that we receive. We practice, we have pre-positioned supplies both in Australia and within the region that allows us to move very quickly. And so we are confident that we're well placed to deal with natural disasters. In terms of the first part of your question about the broader international arrangements that pertain to responding to natural and humanitarian disasters, I think the report card is mixed. I think there are efforts being made to improve coordination, but we've seen in Haiti, in the Pakistan floods in 2010, in the Horn of Africa crisis last year, some real coordination problems between multilateral agencies and between multilateral agencies, national governments and NGOs. And we're certainly working with others to try and sort out better systems to reduce some of the overlap and duplication that's occurred.
Does Australia provide any assistance to the 500,000 Somali refugees in Dadaab refugee camp? And how would you like to see response here improved?
I was fortunate enough to visit the Dadaab camp in September last year, really at the height of the food crisis in the Horn of Africa. And I think the first thing that has to be said is the scale of the Dadaab camp is unprecedented globally. I think if it was a constituted city in Kenya, it would be the third largest population centre in that country. So it is about 500,000 people. The logistics are enormously challenging given the remoteness of the community, and there are real security concerns, unfortunately, that have arisen with the management of the camp, particularly its proximity to the Somali border and infiltration from certain groups from southern Somalia. We have provided an enormous amount of assistance over the last year to Dadaab through our funding support in response to the crisis in the Horn of Africa. So we've been supporting both the UN agencies that have been managing the camp, particularly UNHCR and UNICEF, but also providing support to non-government organisations that have capacity and reach. And groups like Care International are doing a fantastic job in providing management support to the running of that facility. I think the key question that we're going to face is how do we get people to resettle out of the camps, because you have people, I'm sure you're aware, who've now been there their whole lives and know nothing different than life in that camp.
And what about for those refugees who aren't even being registered when they arrive? How can assistance be improved to them?
Well, I think one of the big constraints has been the security situation. We've had a number of periods over the last 12 months where basically the only thing that international agencies have been able to do is deal with the immediate life-threatening situations that some of the people arriving at the camps find themselves in, rather than looking at sort of longer-term programs that might equip people better to return to the places from which they fled in the first place. So there is no easy answer to this, but it is an ongoing problem, and important that the world doesn't forget about it as we move, unfortunately, into the management of other crises in the Sahel and elsewhere.
Peter Baxter, last week we spoke a lot about epidemics on MSF TV, and TB is really a forgotten disease in terms of aid. What is AUSAID doing to address this?
At the global level, we're part of broader international efforts to try and get TB under control. We do this particularly through our funding of the Global Fund. We've provided over $250 million of funding to the Global Fund over the last several years, and we're committed to continue to increase our funding to the Global Fund. And as you know, the Global Fund focuses on TB, malaria and HIV and AIDS, and they're interlinked diseases, particularly HIV, AIDS and TB. So we work through those multilateral organisations, and particularly with the Global Fund, we've put a lot of effort in trying to address some of the issues that have arisen with the management of the Global Fund to ensure that every dollar that's invested through that organisation actually results in some benefit on the ground for the recipients. We also have bilateral programs, particularly in neighbouring countries like Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste. TB is a particular problem in those two countries, and so we're working with their national health authorities to provide the basic facilities to be able to diagnose TB, but also to ensure that the systems are in place to enable drugs to get to people who need it, because as you know, people who suffer from TB need to take long-term courses of drugs, particularly if they develop the multi-drug resistant forms of tuberculosis.
What about in Burma? There's Médecins Sans Frontières is very concerned about the gap in need and access to HIV/AIDS drugs and also TB drugs in Burma. Is this going to be part of AUSAID's new assistance to Burma?
Yeah, we provide funding to what's called the Three Diseases Fund. We've provided just about $20 million so far to help address these particular issues, the issue of tuberculosis and HIV and AIDS in Burma. So the sort of things that we've been doing is providing funding for the distribution of condoms, particularly focused on those high-risk groups such as sex workers or men who have sex with men. We've provided funding for the diagnosis of around 135,000 cases of suspected TB at the moment, and also provided funding for the treatment of almost 2 million cases of malaria. So we're certainly doing that in terms of increasing our funding to those particularly challenging diseases in Burma. We've announced that we're doubling our funding overall to Burma, so it will become one of our larger programs in East Asia. And we're working with other donors, particularly the UK, Norway and the multilateral agencies, to ensure that efforts in Burma are coordinated. One thing we're concerned about is the cancellation of the Global Fund Round 11, which will potentially see a drop in funding to Burma to fight tuberculosis, HIV and AIDS and malaria. And it's important that bilateral donors such as ourselves fill any gaps that might appear as a result of the problems the Global Fund is having in meeting previous commitments.
Next week on MSF TV, we're going to be looking at sexual violence against women. What is AUSAID doing in terms of Papua New Guinea and family and sexual violence?
This is a big issue in our region, and it's one that we've put a lot of effort into over the last few years. We did a very major report a couple of years ago called Stop the Violence, which focused on the Melanesian countries and Timor-Leste. The rates of domestic violence in Papua New Guinea and violence against women in particular are very high. We've provided funding to ensure that particularly the law enforcement authorities in Papua New Guinea have the capability to address issues of domestic violence, both in terms of the legal framework under which people can be prosecuted, but also giving them the capacity to prosecute people. So we've funded now the establishment of 12 special domestic violence units within the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary. We've also stepped up in providing more services to women who are the victims of domestic violence. Only a few weeks ago, at the Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting in Rarotonga, Prime Minister Gillard announced a $320 million Pacific Gender Initiative, and a big element of that gender initiative is doing more in places like Papua New Guinea to address this terrible scourge of violence against women. We've agreed that the first 3 countries that we will develop particular country strategies under that new initiative will be Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands and the Cook Islands as the current chair of the forum. So I don't think any country is doing as much to address domestic violence as Australia is. The Prime Minister is very personally committed to seeing us increase our efforts, and we've put a lot of resources on the table to do that.
AUSAID Director General Peter Baxter, thank you so much for your time on MSF TV.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the initiative of starting the TV station, and I wish you luck.
Thank you.